introduce today's speaker. Professor Mary Papakosmas is our associate editor at JOCC. She is a dedicated faculty in public relations and communications at University of Wollongong School of Business, Australia, where she also serves as the public relations key contact. Professor Mary holds a PhD in social marketing, a master's in research, and a master's in marketing from the University of Wollongong, alongside a Bachelor of Communications from Charles Sturt University, Bathurst. Prior to academia, she built a successful career as an award-winning journalist, which she now draws upon to create engaging, practical, and future-focused learning environments for her students. Dr. Papakosmas's research and teaching are grounded in her commitment to United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, what we call the SDGs, particularly in areas such as quality education, good health, and well-being, reduced inequalities, and sustainable cities and communities. Her academic interests lie at the intersection of marketing and education, and she is passionate about using communication as a tool for social good, empowerment, and inclusive growth across diverse communities. So I welcome Professor Mary once again, and I'm glad that you all have joined in this program for the entire webinar series that JOCC has been conducting for the past few years. So over to you, Professor Mary.
Thank you very much, Professor Manisha, and thank you very much to the Journal for this wonderful invitation to speak with you this afternoon and to really expand our understanding about communication for our own research and professional practice. What I will do, if you will just bear with me for a moment, I'll share some PowerPoint slides and start the presentation. What I would also like to do is, at the end of today's session, once we, sorry, my screen is just catching up. Could someone just let me know if you're seeing these slides okay?
Yes, it is visible, Dr.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Mars. Yeah, so I really see this as an opportunity to expand our understanding and really talk about communication. So whilst I will be delivering some content at the start, I'd really like to see if anyone has any questions or some discussion areas that you'd like to explore. The main focus of this session, as Professor Manisha indicated, is that we're going to look at how our words can really help us to communicate about our research practice and also engage different types of audiences, because we need to understand that in our current environment, we're not just communicating with academia, and that other types of audiences offer us a wealth of opportunities to both talk about and advance our research. Before I proceed, I would like to just formally acknowledge where I am delivering this presentation from in Wollongong. This is Dharawal country, and I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land. It's a wonderful place to live and to learn and to exchange ideas and collaborate, and I have a deep respect and acknowledgement for the traditional custodians of this land. So just looking at what we're going to talk about today, I would like to give you some material to help you identify opportunities for you to communicate. And I don't just mean talk about your research, but communicate in different ways about your research. How you can really effectively reach different types of audiences and overall build interest in what you are working on. And we all understand that our research is a major part of our role and demands an incredible amount of our time and dedication. So how can we really build interest in this work and basically advance our research interests? So what I'll be talking about is identifying why communication is so important to us as academic practitioners and students. What are some of the challenges and opportunities that we face when we're trying to reach these different audiences? I want to give you some practical tips also about how we can create effective messages, and also just to give you some ideas, I'll show you some examples from my work and then open to discussion. Now, it's important for me to also acknowledge that my work and my communication about my work is a process. It's an ongoing process. So I by no means suggest that my practice is complete or my practice is perfect. As an early career researcher, I am still learning, but what I do is I bring my experience with the media, my experience with public relations, to both my own methods about communicating about my research and also the opportunity to share this information with yourselves. On Monday, I'm speaking with high degree research students about similar material and also with industry. So I'm very supportive of this idea of sharing knowledge so that we can all benefit. Just to give you a sense of who I am, Professor Manisha has already explained to you that I have a background from industry as an award-winning journalist, producer and presenter. I've also worked as a media consultant and trainer, and I have several research areas mainly around SDGs, but also around marketing education and, of course, communication. So we're all connected with that concept in some way, whether through our practice or through our research. And for me, it's a really key area of interest and focus. What I'd like to do, first of all, is to start by talking about why communication about our research is important. Effectively, we operate in a very competitive environment, and it's important for us to identify opportunities that we can show and build impact about our work. This is important for us applying for and achieving funding grants. It's important for us as we develop our careers and show impact beyond just delivering academic papers. And it's also important if we're building relationships with community partnerships, and speaking from my own experience at the University of Wollongong, building strategic partnerships is a key part of the university's vision. So those connections and those networks with our communities are incredibly important. So by showing who we are as researchers, this is a great way to build trust with our partners and trust with our communities. So research is important, but the outcomes of our research and the outcomes of our communication, our endeavours, are influenced by people knowing who we are as academics, and also what we are working on, what our specialisations are, what our areas of interest are, and also what our successes are. So whilst there is recognition that communication is important, we also need to recognise that there can be a gap between understanding what it is that we do and also the public being able to access what we do. So there's a bit of a knowledge gap in terms of the knowledge we create and how that knowledge is actually used, other than, as I keep referring to, journal publications. So let's talk about some of the challenges about communicating about our research. Because we're so focused on our area or areas of interest, we often become very focused on that to the extent that we only communicate in discipline-specific language and terms. So one of the challenges is making our work more accessible to different audiences. We also, because of that focus and because of that dedication, may not see the broader impact or the broader interest of our work. So we're so focused on completing the project on time, writing up that paper, attending to revisions and getting the publication, that we don't see, perhaps, beyond that publication. The other big challenge, and I sort of acknowledged this at the beginning of the presentation, is that this is a work in progress, and engagement with our research takes time, and time is a very precious resource. But if we invest in that time, we will have rewards in terms of building our research profile. So the challenges that we identify can be overcome by skill building, and that's partly why we're here today, being prepared, being able to show our expertise, to communicate our expertise, but also communicate authentically. And by authentically, I mean really representing who we are as researchers, what the results of our research are, and how we would like to be perceived by different audiences. So as we move into the next part of the presentation, which is about the skills that we can use and build to overcome these challenges, I'd like to identify really what I refer to as 4 key components. When we're communicating, we need to have a really clear understanding of who our audiences are. And note that I say audiences, plural, because most times we can identify different types of audiences, and we need to identify how we're going to communicate with them. We also need to understand why these different audiences would be interested in what we have to say or what the findings of our research is, because sometimes those reasons for being interested can be very different, and it's up to us to figure out how to communicate best. So that third point, how to communicate, also relates to the type of language that we use. And I think sometimes as academics, we are very used to an academic style of communication, which may not suit when you're speaking to community or when you're speaking with students, for example. So the fourth area that I'd like to examine when talking about overcoming challenges is where we can communicate. So I'll talk to you about identifying some communication opportunities. So skills, preparation, expertise, and communicating authentically to our audiences. So before I launch into this area, I really want everyone to remember that you are the expert for your field. You are starting from a position of strength. I don't know as much about your area of research as you do. So in that sense, you are really the very best advocate to advance the profile of yourself and the profile of your research. So combine your knowledge, your discipline knowledge, your research strengths with some communication skills, and you really have a recipe for success. So I want to start from that position of strength. So how do we craft effective messages? Let's drill down into some specific areas. Understanding who we are communicating with is the most essential starting point, because our audiences have very different levels of connection, familiarity with your subject. So it's important that when we're communicating, we are clear about the types of concepts, terms, the context that you can assume, because your audience may be familiar with it, compared with those audiences who may be very, very unfamiliar with it. So it's up to you to explain where necessary and use terminology that is achievable and accessible for your audience. Also, why do our audiences engage with research? Everyone is interested in what's in it for me. So what's in it for me as an academic is very different from what's in it for me as a student. So when we're communicating, we need to recognize those different types of needs and address by using different messaging. Also, how much time or interest will your audience give to your message? If, for example, you're doing a media interview for a news story, that news story may only be 2 minutes of television or radio time. So your message needs to be very concise and very clear, so you can deliver those key points within that time frame, compared to, for example, a 7,500 word journal article in which you have time to advance your research ideas, your methodology, your conclusions, and your theory in thousands and thousands of words. So our language needs to be adjusted, our priorities need to be adjusted depending on where we're communicating and how we're communicating to that audience. I think one of the key recommendations that I always give researchers when they're thinking about how to communicate their research is to really flip or switch our thinking. It's not primarily about what we want to tell people. It's not about us downloading information. We need to change our thinking so we consider what's in it for the audience, what's important or relevant or interesting to them, and how do they need to hear the information. So the information that you would present at a public forum or a meeting, or when you're called to a panel discussion, is going to be very different again from your journal article or your classroom setting. So you're considering your audience all the time when you're packaging your information. So your message needs
Professor
to
Mary,
be, yes,
your slides are not changing.
they're not changing.
Yes, it is still on
Oh, I'm
slide
so
1.
sorry. Let me try a different technique. Can I just, are you
Yeah, now
seeing this?
now it is changing. We are on slide
Okay,
number
what I
10.
might do, I'm terribly sorry. I don't know if there's any issue with my signal, but what I might do is just maximize the presentation a little.
Yeah,
Is that still clear for everyone?
yeah, it's quite clear. We are on slide number 16. Why wouldn't?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Maz. I will continue, and I do apologize, everyone, for that. I'm not quite sure why there's an issue. So is it okay if I just continue and we maybe catch up on any missed content in the discussion time?
That should be fine, Professor Mary.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So just returning to the content, our language choice needs to be accessible to our audience. And I think we do that when we teach. So if, for example, we're teaching to an introductory first year course, we present our information in a particular way that's suitable to those first year students with no foundation knowledge of the subject. It's very different to a postgraduate course with students who have experience and qualifications already. So use that same thinking when you are communicating with different types of audiences. Make your message accessible so your audiences understand the ideas that you're focusing on. So I'll give you an example from my own research. I've recently had a paper published with some colleagues around the impact of generative AI. So we're looking at the impact of Gen AI on marketing practice and making some recommendations about how this would shape marketing curriculum. So I can identify several audiences who may be interested in this. Firstly, of course, academics with implications for theory and practice. Students would be interested in this outcome because this affects how they learn, what they learn, and how they prepare to be job-ready graduates. My colleagues are interested in this because it presents opportunities for them to upskill and train in using Gen AI and also develop their own teaching and learning curriculum. And also, of course, industry is interested because this affects how they do their job on an everyday basis. So each of these four audiences are clear communication opportunities that I, as the communicator, as the academic, need to update and modify my messaging according to who they are and what they need to hear. So I'll give you an example. This content is representative of possible content for a journal article abstract. So you'll notice that the language is quite technical, it's quite theoretical, it's quite dense or as I said, technical. So it's not easily accessible to a wide range of audiences. So it suits one particular purpose, but not every single purpose. So the point I'm trying to make here is just because you create content or create a message doesn't mean that it's going to be relevant to all of your audiences. So on this next slide, I'm showing you an example of how we could modify the content to make it accessible to a different type of audience. So this is more simplified language. It's really focusing on the impact and the effect of the research and the result that it could have on people in the workplace. So I'm modifying the content so that it is more relevant. You say, you want to fight? You want to go? You want to smoke? Sorry, just have some audio coming from another location. When we're looking at where to communicate, there are several different types of opportunities or channels, if you like, if we're going to use communication theory. There are academic channels, journals, conferences, seminars, all of those that we're very, very familiar with. There are also opportunities for public engagement. So we could speak to the media, we could use our social media, we can make presentations to policy. I'm sure that many of us here in the session are involved in influencing policy, briefing committees, briefing politicians, briefing our own institutions, for example. I'm sure that many of us are involved in building connections with industry. For me as a researcher, my partnerships, my connections, my networks present really rich opportunities to apply my research, to continue my research. But these opportunities are facilitated if I have a very good communication profile so that industry can see who I am as a researcher and how I actually work. And finally, we can't forget the opportunity that students present as a place where we can talk about our research, where we can show where it is applied. So our students are an incredibly important audience, which I really recommend people consider, so that you can show those connections between your research and how it affects your teaching practice and how it can affect student outcomes. So some strategies to build our profile, our visibility as a researcher, include digital platforms, include engaging with the media, and also engaging with non-academic partners. So what I'll do is explore in the next few slides how we can develop our skills in this area and build our profile. So when we're thinking about building our digital presence, and I know that this is incredibly important for us as academics, where can we promote ourselves and promote who we are? Our institutional webpage, for example, you can find me on the University of Wollongong webpage, is often the first point of call. Our Google Scholar profile, we can set up alerts to track our citations. So again, we are easy to find by other researchers, by other potential colleagues or collaborators. Our ORCID ID also connects to our research platform, and also ResearchGate and Academia EDU are other options that are available to us to promote our research. So what I'm saying here is think about this as a strategy. Think about this as an ongoing process to build your presence in multiple locations. LinkedIn is a wonderful resource for us to find out information, but it's also a wonderful place for us to promote ourselves. So social media platforms that are relevant to our research, to our discipline, are great places to start building our profile, but we need to make sure that our information is relevant, up to date, professional. So we're not using this for social networking, we're using this for professional academic networking. And it needs to include some basics like a photograph, consistent biographical information, and descriptions about our work, again, that is in accessible language. When we're also building our digital profile, we can find ourselves with opportunities to update people about what we're doing. So research milestones, we can post preprints, we can make open access versions available online, we can let people know where our projects are at or who we're about to collaborate with, we can provide commentary on various developments in our field. All of these methods are consistent ways to ensure that our profile remains in view, if you like. So we don't post once every 8 months. We think strategically, we post relevant information that is of interest to our audience and also represents who we are as researchers. The other thing that I would really recommend is repurposing content. So for example, you are accepted for a conference paper, you deliver the outcome of your research at that conference, you are not only published in a journal, but you're published in the conference proceedings. Utilize something like LinkedIn to talk about that conference, to talk about not only your journal publication, but also your involvement with the conference. So in this way, there is a consistent message around that particular publication, but you're finding multiple ways to provide that information. Another way to establish yourself and your profile is to be established as a thought leader in your field. So this is where you are strategically positioning yourself as an expert. Now, admittedly, this will take time. So for myself as an early career researcher, this is a work in progress. It doesn't happen overnight, but unless I invest in the time, it will not it will not occur. So think about what your key areas of focus are and how you can develop recognition with genuine engagement, public communication, and consistently connecting your research contributions to this focus area. Our use of diverse platforms, as I mentioned a few moments ago, is also going to help our establishment as a thought leader. So your blogs, your articles, opinion pieces, your posts on social media, webinars such as this, your participation to invitational panels, etc. You are going to, if you are conscious of this as a strategy, you are going to find opportunities. So I'm hoping that with consideration of the content of this webinar, that you'll start to identify how you can build a strategy to advance your research outcomes. There's also an opportunity, I think, to work with the media. So to build connections with journalists who may specialise also in your field of interest, to engage with relevant professional organisations or discipline regulators, to build your networks. And this may lead to things like invitations to contribute to policy development, invitations to contribute to panel discussions, and maybe even conferences. Now, while we're speaking about the media, I just want to mention also how to engage with the media, because they're professionals just like us. And if we understand how they work and what their requirements are, it can often help us to present our information in a more user-friendly manner. So it's important to understand that most journalists have really tight deadlines, that if we work with those deadlines, we can also help the journalist complete their story. So building clear information, building stories that have concise quotes that really capture the key points about what you're trying to communicate. So a journalist is going to be much more interested in your ability to be concise and relevant and to the point than someone who is struggling to articulate what their research is all about. So as I mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation, we are the best advocates for our research. We understand better than anyone else what our research project is all about. So use that passion for your area of interest to communicate concisely why it is interesting to a journalist or to the general public. Journalists find it really difficult to build a story, whether it's a print story or a TV story or an online post. It's very difficult to build an interesting story if they're talking with people who aren't experts in the topic, people who don't show their expertise, and people who don't convey that information in an interesting or newsworthy way. So you need to figure out how to explain your research in a concise, engaging way by focusing on what's relevant to a broader audience than simply academia. Newsworthiness, when we refer to this topic, and I'm going back to my experience as a former journalist, newsworthiness is something that's timely, that's interesting, that's unique, and fundamentally relevant to the audience. So consistently be the best advocate for your research by finding what is interesting and what is valuable for your audience. So that's a simplistic representation of how to build the focus of your story. When we're engaging with non-academic partners, this is another effective way for us to build our research profile. If we can focus on what those real-world applications are, that are the outcomes of our research, we demonstrate social impact. So this is increasingly important as we compete for fewer and fewer funding applications, as we also compete for promotion. The element of impact, what is going to make a difference? What is the difference of our research beyond publication, but a difference for either education, for our society? This is a way to focus on positive outcomes from your research. As I mentioned earlier, when we're trying to build partnerships with our non-academic community or industry partners, those organizations are going to be interested in how you communicate impact. So your acceptance of speaking opportunities, your acceptance of advisory roles is another way to advance your research. So what I'd like to do now is just provide you with some examples from my own work, just to give you a sense of how to apply all of the information that I have just spoken about. So as Dr. Manisha mentioned in the introduction, in her very kind introduction, my areas of research are the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically Goal 3 and Goal 5. I'm also very interested in educational pedagogy and fundamentally the process of communication. So I'd like to show you some examples now of how I communicate about these particular areas of research focus for me. So in 2024, just last year, I was involved in some research around female football coaches, what their experiences were, what the issues were, and then that led to some research about the Women's World Cup. So that then in turn led to, as you'll see here on the left-hand side, an invitation to present at an international sports symposium. But I didn't just present at that conference. I made sure that my participation and my research was highlighted in my LinkedIn posts. So I'm utilizing social media to both advance my profile and also this particular research interest. Subsequently, we currently have a journal submission under review. So of course, if hopefully that is accepted, I will be promoting and speaking about that on social media and utilizing those findings in my teaching. Another example, more generally around sustainable development goals, because of my work in the field of equity, I received a University of Wollongong award, which I promoted, actually a colleague promoted on LinkedIn, so that advanced my professional profile. I also took the opportunity myself to promote sustainable development goals on LinkedIn, and I also have a publication related to this field of interest, which of course, I have the academic outcome, but I also took the opportunity to promote on LinkedIn. So I'm building a network, if you like, around my particular area of interest, which in this particular case is sustainable development goals. This is another example of how my research interests, in this case, research pedagogy, educational pedagogy, my research around generative AI. This is the publication that I referred to earlier in the presentation. So not only is there the dissemination of the ideas through journal publication, but also through social media. Additionally, I've presented on this topic to industry practitioners. I've presented on this topic to my colleagues, both within the marketing and business disciplines, but also across the university to other university disciplines. And I've contributed to teaching and learning practice and the use of generative AI in our student experience. So this is one single topic, if you like, but it is being disseminated in a range of different ways. So I really want you to think about, if you're choosing one area of your research, what opportunities for communication and publicity can you think about? This is another example around the area of communication. So not only am I very privileged to be involved with JOCC, and I take every opportunity to promote the journal, but I also advance the concept and practice of good communication, and I've had several opportunities to do that in terms of panel presentations, training seminars. I promote ideas and advancement around communication theory and study, and I also utilize my social media platforms to talk about my work and my collaborations and my research. So I'm trying to show you, I guess, that I'm not only saying what we can do, but I'm showing you my own practice in terms of advancing this idea and developing a profile around my own research. So a few concluding thoughts as we wrap up. I like to remind people that the process of building our visibility, expertise, and professional brand is a time-consuming process. It does take time, but it is a long-term investment with strong returns, to use a financial agenda. So moving ahead, what would my recommendations be for you? First of all, be proactive. Look for every opportunity to find audiences for your research, for your areas of work, and also to show your specific expertise. Each one of you here today, each one of you perhaps listening to the recording, has specific, very special expertise. So use your communication to show that expertise and advance that expertise. Also, think about how and where you can learn. Model your techniques on successful academics and successful communicators. I'm always looking around me to see what people are doing, how they work, and how they advance their profile. For me, that is very much a work in progress. Regardless of what we communicate or how often we communicate, always stay authentic in your communication. Your personal style, your personality is unique to you. Your research interests are unique to you. So the way in which you communicate authentically and uniquely should represent who you are. Take the opportunity to showcase your expertise and your enthusiasm. I've used the word passion here, but I don't think that is overused. I think we are and should be passionate about our research. So when you are invited to communicate or take an opportunity to communicate, please be authentic and enthusiastic about that. I see so many researchers who expect an audience to listen or who don't seem to be interested in their work. I love my research topics. I love communicating about my research, and I like to model enthusiastic communication. And finally, the best one, I think, is the last point. Review your work, be kind to yourself, and work to continuously improve, because this is a practice of communication, and we are always building and improving our profile. So that is where I'd like to officially end the presentation. I do have a feedback survey. I know I would love to get your comments or your responses. My friend, Mr. Arpit, will add the link to the chat, and I'll also add that link. It's just a very simple 3-question questionnaire. So if you wouldn't mind answering those questions, it would be very, very helpful for me understanding my communication techniques and whether you found that helpful to you. So I'll just stop the share for the moment here, if that's okay. And I'd love to open the floor to discussion if there are any questions, any comments, or any areas that anyone would like to talk about.
Professor Mary, actually we have asked the questions and we have received a few questions from our attendees. So I will read it out one by one, and
Yes,
we would love to if you address the questions.
sure.
So one of the attendees asked, how can researchers strike a balance between academic rigor and accessibility when communicating their work to non-academic audiences?
That's a wonderful question. Thank you very much. So the question is around maintaining academic rigor and engagement. I think this is really bringing us back to thinking about the language that we are using and focusing on the impact of your research. So I think if you're talking with, for example, community representatives or community partners, they're not as interested in academic rigor as we in academia are. What they are more interested in is the impact or the results or the benefits, if you want to put it simplistically, of your research. So thinking about how we can communicate that impact in very user-friendly terms. Now, by that, I don't mean dumbing down our concepts. We need to be respectful of our audiences, but it is very important to be able to explain our ideas, to make it relevant to our audience and show that impact. So this is our responsibility as good communicators to translate the findings of our research, which are bound in academic rigor, otherwise they wouldn't be published, to an audience that may be industry partners or community representatives. They're not interested as much as we are in the theory the methodology, the justification. What they are interested in is what's in it for them. And that's what we need to find in our communication.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Mary. The next question is, since today's world is about information overload, how do we focus on building trust?
Thank you very much. I think we're all, so the question was around recognizing the fact that information overload is persistent, and we all know that experience. How do we focus on building trust? I think trust comes back to authentic communication. So when we are communicating about ourselves and about our research, we are transparent, we are authentic, we are genuine. We are not creating a profile that is misrepresentative of us as academics or us as professionals. We are very genuine in our communication. It would be wonderful, for example, to make grand claims about us or our work, but they are very quickly found out. And we need to recognize that opportunities to build our profile contribute to our professional reputation. So anything that we do is representative of us as professionals. So I think that being respectful of our audience and being authentic, trustworthy communicators is going to build that profile that audiences can respect and in turn trust. The other thing I would say in terms of that information overload is to be careful about our communication. We don't need to, for example, make 5 LinkedIn posts about exactly the same material just to hope that more people are going to see it. We need to be strategic, we need to be thoughtful in our posts and make sure that each one offers unique and special value. So that way, when we do post, people recognize that it's us and they pay attention.
So the next question is, in your experience, what are some common communication pitfalls scholars and students should avoid, especially in public forum or media?
Common communication pitfalls. Yes, thank you very much for that question. I have possibly learnt the hard way and through observation. As a journalist, I interviewed hundreds, if not thousands of people. And it's really interesting to see by that exposure to different ways of communicating, effective communicators. Effective communicators are really well prepared. They know their material, they know what their key messages are, and they know how to enthusiastically, authentically communicate what those key points are. There is nothing worse than trying to talk to someone or interview someone who is unfamiliar with their material or who struggles to find what the impact is or what the relevance is. So if I were to be interviewed by a journalist, I would be very clear about what my key points were and what was important for me to convey in that instance. Also, a common pitfall, I see a lot of people give presentations, and I'm sure that many of us here today can make the distinction between a great presenter and someone who is there under, it seems like, duress. They're not interested in the presentation opportunity. They're not enthusiastic about the opportunity or the content. So please be your best advocate, know your material, and be enthusiastic.
Thank you so much.
There is also a comment in the chat.
Yes, I was reading that
about
only.
the related question from
Yeah.
Dr. Malabika.
Yeah. So one of our attendees is asking, do you think tone too plays a vital role?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Mulabika, for that comment. Tone is incredibly important. I actually speak and teach in this area in one of my professional communication subjects at UOW. This is nonverbal communication. And when we're communicating with people, whether it be in the classroom, in an industry panel, in an interview, in a conference presentation, the tone of our verbal communication indicates not only our engagement with the topic, our enthusiasm, but also our engagement and commitment to our audience. So yes, tone is a wonderful tool to convey the importance of what we're talking about, but also your interest in the audience.
Thank you so much. Next, as we are running short of time, we'll be taking next two questions. So the second last question for the webinar: how can early career researchers build confidence in their communication skills, especially when engaging with unfamiliar or interdisciplinary audiences?
Thank you for that question. And I think that it's one that comes back to some, I guess, very simple recommendations. Building confidence is our own perception, I think, oftentimes of our own abilities. So how do we build that perception of our own abilities? Preparation, and if I make it very, very simple, it's not complex, positive thinking. We need to convince ourselves that we deserve to be there, we deserve to have that opportunity, and we are our best advocate for those ideas. And then go into that opportunity with confidence, but also knowing that we have done the work. Because if you have that opportunity and you don't prepare, if you don't prepare your presentation, then you won't also still be confident. I think don't underestimate the amount of preparation that you can do. And as an early career researcher and student, I understand your perspective. I'll be speaking on Monday with UOW, University of Wollongong, early career researchers and HDR students. And that's one of the points I'll be making. Your preparation and your recognition of your own expertise will help build your confidence in that setting.
Yes. The last question.
Dr. Mads, could I just say, whilst people are listening, if I could just repost in the chat that that link to the survey, if everyone wouldn't mind taking a moment to complete that survey as we're still in the seminar.
Definitely.
Thank you, Dr. Mads.
So the last question is, how important is storytelling in academic communication, and how can one incorporate it without compromising on objectivity?
I'm sorry, how important is, what was that?
Storytelling.
I'm not sure I understand the question, I'm sorry.
How important is storytelling in academic communication? How one can incorporate it without compromising on objectivity?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think storytelling is a wonderful concept because effectively, when we write a journal article, we're telling a story. But we still need to think about who's listening to that message, who our audience is, and how do we best present that information. So the storytelling techniques that we might use in a teaching setting, if we have a 2-hour workshop or a 1-hour lecture, are going to be very different because we have that amount of time. Compared with, say, an interview that might be on radio for 5 minutes. You need to think about your audience. You need to think about the time in which you have to tell that story or present those ideas. But you also need to think about whether telling a story is the most effective way of presenting that message. Sometimes it may take too much time, and what your audience needs is something much more concise, much more relevant.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mary, for your insights. Any other questions? Can we have one last question from our audience? Oh, yes, I got one. This is about what role does emotional intelligence play in crafting the message that resonates with the audience?
Thank you. That is the most interesting question because next week I'm going to be teaching about emotional intelligence in my professional communications course. Emotional intelligence is incredibly important in life and in teaching and in our research, but it's also important when we're communicating. So if you can discern that your message or the way that you are communicating your message is not reaching your audience as you're speaking to them, how can you use that understanding? How can you use those perceptions to modify your message or make it more relevant to your audience? If they're showing their disinterest, if they're showing their confusion, then that's your responsibility using your emotional intelligence. And I hope I'm interpreting the question the right way. It's your responsibility to modify your message. So seeking clarity or seeking a check-in or seeking feedback will really help you reach your audience more effectively. And that can be particularly important in a live setting where you're perhaps conducting a lecture, or when you're perhaps presenting from a panel or giving an industry presentation, working with your audience. So I guess I would extend that concept a little further to remind us all that communication is a two-way process. We use the feedback from our audience to help us construct better messages and also to clarify understanding. So don't underestimate any of the points that we've talked about from the chat when we're constructing our messages, when we're constructing our communication, to make us more engaging, more effective, and more considerate, respectful communicators.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mary. All of us has like that feeling, and we were wanting that the session should continue like for a couple of more hours, but as time is not permitting
I
us,
would love to. I'm free on Friday afternoon. Maybe we can do maybe we can do a discussion session or something.
for sure, for sure. So that's where we end. But before we end, the most important thing is the gratitude. A heartfelt thank you to Dr. Mary Papakosmas for sharing her time, insight, and experience as well as expertise in such an engaging and inspiring session on impactful communication. We heartfully thank you for your time. We also extend our sincere gratitude to Professor Manisha Pathak, editor of GOCC, for her continued guidance and support, Professor Pooja Thomas and Arpit for their seamless coordination throughout the happening of this event. Special thanks to our IT team at MICA for ensuring a smooth experience, and GOCC editorial team for their behind the scenes efforts in making this webinar a success. And above all, our attendees, thank you so much for being so wonderful part of our journey, GOCC, and this thoughtful conversation. Your presence truly made this webinar meaningful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you so much, Dr. Naz and Professor Manisha, for the opportunity. It's been wonderful to answer questions, to talk about communication, and I've just popped my email address in the chat if anyone would like to contact me or follow up on anything that we've talked about today. Thank you, everyone. Been absolute
Thank you, Mary. It's delightful. Thank you so much.